Is the federal funding of embryonic stem cells an endorsement of abortion? What are the ethical and legal implications of stem cell research? These and other controversial questions we'll discuss today on Open Minds. Stay tuned.
From the Anthony Maltese Studios at William Patterson University, this is Open Minds.
Hello and welcome to Open Minds. I'm your host, Sasha Kazan. Stem cells are cells that have the potential to develop into many different cell types in the body, serving as a sort of repair system. Using stem cells for medical treatment has been the focus of research projects that are showing encouraging results. Scientists believe stem cell research will help cure diabetes, cancer, arthritis, Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's disease, and many other conditions. But the problem is to produce human embryonic stem cells requires the destruction of embryos to obtain them, which is currently prohibited by federal law. Joining us today is Dr. Lionel Edwards and Dr. Emmanuel Onaivi. Thank you so much for being here today. So tell us a little bit about yourselves.
Yes, I'm a professor of biology, and I teach here at William Patterson University. I'm also a guest scientist at the NIDA, National Institute of Health, and I also do research there. And the research I do there are very important with regards to part of the conversation we're having today on stem cell research. And I've also edited a book, as you can see here, on the biology of marijuana, which also is very controversial, and we might be able to talk about it at some other point. But over to you.
Okay. Well, I'm a physician. I work as a senior director for the Novartis company, and I'm a weekend professor, an adjunct professor at Temple University in the School of Pharmacology. And I teach the master's course there. Like Emmanuel here, I've also been involved with the NIH. I served on two of their committees, both concerning research in women and for the Institute of Medicine. I also sat on the Special Populations Committee of PhRMA, which is the Pharmaceutical Manufacturer Association's governing body, and I used to chair the committee for special populations, which involved women and ethnic groups representation in research.
Have you been involved personally with stem cell research?
I haven't.
I haven't also personally been involved, but the technology is relatively new and it's very exciting, and I'm looking forward to one day be able to use stem cells in understanding how the brain functions and perhaps to utilize it as a therapeutic approach.
Tell us, do you think stem cell research should be allowed in the United States?
Of course, yes. It's a new technology, and although this technology has just started, it should be given a chance to be properly understood and the mechanisms involved to be utilized in helping various disease conditions, as you mentioned at the opening.
And you, Dr. Edwards?
Well, actually, I think we must appreciate that stem cell research as such has been going on actually for quite a long time. People don't realize that with the myeloid type of leukemias, we've been doing marrow growth and replacement using cells out of the marrow. And this is, so far now, we have 77 diseases which we are treating with cell therapy.
What are the implications of legalizing it? Do you think that many more doctors would become involved if it was legalized?
At the moment, there's some controversy, and that's why we're doing this program. Yes, when it's legalized, it is obvious, especially if the process of differentiation of these stem cells and what stem cells are is well understood, then, and if it is very important in the treatment of these disease conditions, then obviously a number of doctors, if it can cure some of these disease conditions today that humans cannot cure, human doctors cannot cure, then obviously, yes, many doctors will use the process.
I think we're a bit concerned that doctors may go overseas where they're able to utilize many techniques that we are not and achieve funding. the University of Pittsburgh has just completed a study in Latin America where they introduced human heart cell, which they had taken from donors and put them in. It was a controlled study with a placebo group and those receiving the live cells, and they stopped the study and crossed over because they had 50% increase in the heart activity, 50% in the ejection fraction. So again, they're doing it over there from the Americans going out to...
I understand. Stem cell research involves in vitro fertilization to create embryos that stem cells are extracted from. What are your views in creating life this way?
I think immediately one has to be cautious here of interpretation of what stem cells are and where stem cells are obtained from, because there are different types of stem cells. And the ones that are obtained from in vitro fertilization, where a couple perhaps have not been able to have babies and they go to see their doctor and they start the process in the dish, in a test tube, where they obtain sperm and egg from this couple and allow it to fertilize and be able to select some of those for implantation into the woman. In that case, there are always a lot of leftovers of these cells in the petri dish. Number one, we should not confuse this with the normal process of reproduction. And then those cells that are left over that can become these embryonic stem cells, what do you want to do with those? Should they just be thrown out? If you don't throw them out and you want to use it to relieve human pain and suffering, then I think perhaps that's the right way to go.
Yeah, I think we all have a horror of the sort of thing I saw in the New Yorker. It was an advertisement, $8,000, it said, come in and give your eggs. Young women who are healthy with $8,000, it's a simple procedure. What we're worried about is that they're doing that not to help fertilize couples, to give them children, but in fact, buy eggs for embryonic research, and that, I think, is a no-no.
In fact, this is why this should be done properly and supervised by the authorities and the federal government. And if this is done properly, this would be against the law to sell eggs or to sell sperm or to even sell these embryos. So who has the custody of this? If it's done properly and utilized and studied and the science well established and understood, then there will be adequate and proper way to use this to help those disease conditions at this time that no medicine can cure. Like you mentioned, Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, and diabetes and other cancer, etc.
Yeah, but I think you've got to be a little bit careful on this one because there's two questions wrapped up in this. Is when does life start? Is it life that must be protected or a conscious life? And of course you can debate whether a baby is conscious when it's born. What do you mean by consciousness? So that, I think, is an artificial divide. And I did studies in neonates and I did with clinical research, and we had babies from 24 weeks of gestation, 24 weeks pregnant, born prematurely, and 50% of them survived. And yet, technically, you're allowed to abort those up to 27 weeks under federal law. 50% lived. So is it not a life at 23 weeks? We're pushing the barriers back. So I do differ from you a little bit here. I have some discomfort about deliberately fertilizing eggs in order to do STEM research. I do agree with you, once it's done, I think it poses another moral and ethical situation to us all, because you can't use them. They're frozen, they lie around. Religious leaders say, you cannot do anything with them. What are you going to do, leave them in the refrigerator for 2,000 years? Or are you going to destroy them, in which case you're doing an abortion, effectively? So, I mean, they've not got it right. So I think it's a worse crime not to utilize that tissue now, having got that situation, but I don't like to get to that situation.
Currently, life begins at birth. After the second trimester, abortion is illegal. When do you think that life begins, in the terms of conception versus consciousness?
Sorry, I don't know that I totally agree with life begins once you're born. There's good evidence to show that babies here in the uterus, you can influence with music. My own children, I put to sleep in the womb playing Beethoven's Fifth, which is a noisy thing, but it put them to sleep. You could shout and they would react. So, and the life as such, you mean they're counting as a person, but you can still get sued, you can still get prison for destroying a baby in the uterus which the mother wanted to keep. You know, car crashes, things like that, people get double homicide, or, you know, we've had a couple of instances where women have been taking cocaine and the infants died and the hospital sued them for killing that child.
So you believe in life begins at conception?
I'm not sure. Life begins at conception. Does a person begin at conception? I don't know the answer to that.
Well, I'd like to agree with Lionel here because life is referred to as a continuum. Sperm and eggs are alive. And because sperm and eggs are alive, it helps this continuum. However, the embryo that can be created from this sperm and egg cells can be distinguished from a human life. So if at conception we indicate that life starts at that time, but if you have sperm and egg cells in a petri dish and you put the petri dish right here, that is not going to grow to become a human being. But if it is implanted in the woman, then life begins at that time. However, as Dr. Lionel also said, the consciousness begins as this differentiation process continues, which we now poorly understand. And this differentiation process, just before the baby is born, the cerebrum, the seat of consciousness in the brain, is where the baby now becomes conscious. So there's a big separation between life and consciousness. However, in the test tube, I don't believe that you can equate that to human life.
Well, I think we will have to disagree on that one. I take it, push it further back. I see a day when our scientists will turn around to us, somebody somewhere will produce the baby and continue it in the test tube or in an aliquot vat with food right through until it gets to 22, 23 weeks, and we know we can handle it from then on.
Okay, this is the big point. Therefore, should the federal government, should the United States now stop this type of research? So that is the big question here. If the federal government wants this done properly and adequately for the sake of the human suffering and disease, then there will be laws in place to stop people who will benefit from profiting from selling this and making it in the improper way as described by Lionel.
President Bush prohibited the use of federal monies to produce human embryonic stem cells and allowed funding for only those already produced for research. According to St. Anthony Messenger Press, his decision was made 16 days after meeting with Pope John Paul II to discuss stem cell research. Now, we all know that there's a law in the United States that separates church from state. Do you think that President Bush makes his decision based on his religion or on his politics?
Well, a lot of things you've bundled up into that. First of all, what is St. Anthony's Messenger? It doesn't quite equate with New York Times or Washington Post, but did you know where that came from? That
I am not completely sure.
Well, we don't want to have a CBS scandal, do we? No, but as you know, in this country, state is supposed to be separate from religion, and there does seem to be more evidence that President Bush is allowing his religious beliefs to sway some of his actions. Though he has taken a pragmatic approach in some ways by allowing a certain degree of stem cell research, embryonic stem cell research, that is, in allowing lines that have already been produced, not new ones created, but ones that are existing. The negative we have just found out in the last week is that these cells, the surviving tissues, contain a foreign molecule called sialytic acid, which is inimical to being transplanted and will affect chemically. So unfortunately, these cells really aren't worth too much.
In order to continue with Lionel's answer, I would like to agree with him that yes, politics as well as religion can, especially in the case of President Bush, are mixed. And therefore it became very difficult for him to give the go-ahead outright with his cabinet for this type of research to go on. And therefore he's doing it in a way that is not allowing complete overhaul of the system for this to manifest into a a situation where we can know what these stem cells will do and what they cannot do. At this time, we don't have adequate knowledge of how differentiation takes place. And doing it half-heartedly is not the correct answer.
Yeah, I think when you're saying differentiation, we know that if we add a certain hormone-type compound that's found naturally, growth factors we call that, cardiac neurotrophic growth factors, stem cell factors, colony stimulating, all this sort of things. We've discovered these relatively recently over the last, well, having said that, 15 years, because I was working on colony stimulators. But, so I have had something to do with it, you're right. I'm really trying to get at the fact that we don't know fully yet, and there are examples where they've attempted to put, say, cells into people's brains to get them, and they've not succeeded, because there are other factors. What's in the brain may be countering the cells, you know, because we all have stop-and-go mechanisms to stop us overgrowing, to stop us undergrowing, and sometimes overstimulating these cells can transform them, differentiate them into unspecialized cells, which are sometimes called cancer.
So clearly, more research is required on these stem cells and other types of stem cells to be able to use them therapeutically.
Understand. Well, we have to take a quick break, but stay tuned. We'll be right back with more Open Minds. Well, thank you so much. You guys did a great job. Welcome back to Open Minds. I'm your host, Sasha Kazan. If you just joined us, we've been discussing embryonic stem cell research. With us is Dr. Lionel Edwards and Dr. Emmanuel Onaivi. According to St. Anthony's Messenger Press, the Pope sees the United States as pivotal in setting moral, social policies worldwide. Do you think that this is true in the case of stem cell research?
Yes, it is true, but wrong. It is wrong in the sense that if this is not allowed to properly get the adequate funds for the research that is necessary, it appears experts in this area might leave the country to other places where such research can go on, like in Israel or Australia and perhaps England.
Yeah, but I think we have to differentiate that there are different types of stem cells. We have talked about embryonic stem cells, and that's where the controversy is. But there's an enormous body of work going on what are termed adult stem cells. And that's going on in this country, and of course your National Institute of Medicine and NIH are working hard at that. And that is taking primitive cells, we'll call them primitive cells, left over from the embryonic development stage, which constantly are drawn upon to replace. We used to think the brain you were born with a fixed amount of neurons. We know that's not true now. Just recently, 3 years ago, we found that neurons were actively replaced if you stimulated the brain, and I mean intellectually stimulated the brain. You could actually regrow neurons and axons into them. So there's a lot of work going on there, and I think we still are quite free to do this work, and we can attract adequate funds. And this I do see as the job mainly of academia. I don't see it as a pharmaceutical thing. Pharmaceutical is about developing the product, developing the drug, developing the mediums, developing the conditions, but the actual original discoveries is an academic exercise.
And for this to be an academic exercise and a basic research exercise, funds should be made available without any limitations, because as Lionel said, there are different types of stem cells. There are the embryonic stem cells, which are referred to as both totipotent. That means they can divide into all types of cells, and pluripotent. But the adult stem cells do not have the capacity like the promise of the embryonic stem cells. Yes, the research also on that level is perhaps right now also very rudimentary, because really the embryonic stem cell research really started in full swing from 1998. And now with the half-baked way of conducting that research, then you're not going to be having the total benefit of this. Therefore, scientists, like I said earlier, may have to go to places where they can reap the full benefit, and perhaps to be able to help humans that need this treatment.
Yeah, but even so, the adult, so-called adult, or the existing stem cells within our bone marrow, within we now spleen, we know all the tissues contain these nascent new cells, do have the capacity of swapping tissues. You can get from the liver, you can get muscle cells to grow, you can get